Urban Wild. Today is Monday, March 27th, 2023. We're back here at our wonderful Urban Wild event on the 9th day, the perpetual 9th day here in this abandoned space in Ashkelon, and space in between buildings, space in between houses and other projects that was neglected, that we kind of, can't say claimed, but took responsibility for is a better word. We cleaned it up, made it safe, started bringing food and other things for the cats, and all of a sudden it became a thing. So now here we are. We're on a rotating basis. We have at least 50 cats. They come to eat on a regular basis, from tiny kittens like Aphrodite here to bigger and older ones. None of these cats live here in the park. None of these cats stay in the park. By the end of the day, actually within an hour, they're all gone. Again, after the food is finished, and things go back to normal, but they don't. Meaning they improve. Every single time they improve a little bit, because we are modifying and adapting and fixing the scarcity mentality to an abundance mentality, where not only do these cats get what they need, and often a lot of what they want, but they even can leave over. And once they learn that there's enough that they can leave over, the entire approach to things change. It gets balanced. And today I'm going to try to talk about balance if I get to it. In the meantime, I'm just doing my review. That's a cat obviously doesn't know me so much, so he got scared. This is Dingo. Other kittens, call them the cats of the wall. This spot was cleaned up quickly. There's some leftovers there that'll get eaten. Here there's some scraps. Some food left here on the wall. We do that tapping to let them know where there's food. Here, up here. There you go. And if I stay here, then she will realize that it's not attention or food. You can get both. But for now, she wants attention more than food. So does Dingo. Got to get food for Limpy. He didn't get his dose. Another kitten. All these cats here. So today, I wanted to see if I can speak about balance. And how does that apply? What does that mean? Etc., etc. But first I have to feed Limpy, because if I don't feed him, nobody will. Now, Limpy's also one of those that prefers attention over food. He needs both. I'm gonna have to get him more food because he didn't respond to this calling. So aside from what we're doing here, and anybody who wants to understand more, they can ask, or don't. This whole purpose, this whole mission, this whole experiment, which is nothing more than just an attempt to create balance, it became something. I'll explain in a minute what does that mean, that it became something. Where did it come from? Where did it go? I have to get this off the floor. Stupid cats, they fight each other without realizing they don't have to fight. And that's the whole point of the scarcity mentality and the abundance mentality that we're trying to teach. First I have to go, I wonder if that's Limpy over there. Once I give the food out, then I'll try to explain what I'm trying to do. Oh, that is food that I left yesterday. So this is Limpy's private feeding station for today. There's a kitten that's not yet part of the party, although has been. A few weeks ago on Saturday night it came to me when I was taking out the garbage. So, what does any of this have to do with balance, and what am I talking about? Balance is a really tricky word. I guess that's why it represents balance, and why it's so hard to find. It's hard to find because things keep changing all the time. Non-stop. And the more variables in the equation, the more things are going to change. And the key about balance is always adjusting. But the secret to finding true balance is not putting extreme stresses on the limits, which is one way of achieving balance. You have equal extreme stresses on both sides of a fulcrum, then you have balance. The problem is that if the stress is too much to carry the weight of the combined elements that need to be balanced, then the system will break. That's what's happened in the world today. Time after time after time. And taking an allopathic approach, a band-aid approach, move on to the next thing, leaving the previous broken thing behind for archaeologists or other people to find. Our pickers, we keep on moving forward without adjusting the balance. So that Maimonides was a universal sage, universal advisor to all faiths, all religions, all everyone. He was also one of the fathers of modern medicine. Boker Tov. Fathers of modern medicine and science. He taught us in his 8 chapters, he taught us that to find balance, he meant to find, well, not what he meant, what he said was to find the center. In other words, to find balance, you have to find the center, is the point. To find the center, you have to adjust our extremes by going from one extreme to the other, he explains, as a way to find a happy medium. It's supposed to be. Unfortunately, it can also become the equivalent of an atomic clock, where if all the elements keep shifting back and forth from extreme to extreme to extreme to try to find the balance, it never ends up resting in the balance. Keeps stretching the limits further and further out. Which is great in theory, great in science, great in a laboratory. But in real life, what happens is it keeps stretching everything thinner and thinner, weaker and weaker, more and more stressed, until a moment or until a period like now, Boker Tov, until a period like now, which has happened many times throughout history, where things are so out of whack, Boker Tov, so out of whack that there needs to be a quantum adjustment. I don't want to talk about what happened in the past, and I'm not justifying or rationalizing, I'm just commenting on things that have already happened. Now the problem is, we're not taught these things until it's too late. We don't know what the limits are until it's too late. You only know the limits once you've passed it or once you've broken whatever it is that you're testing. And until one has done that, and we have no idea what the limits are. So stress tests are important. In fact, that's what children learn. When I say children, that applies to everyone who doesn't yet know whatever it is they're trying to learn. So we're all children in one way or another to the things that we're new to the things we don't understand. And as things change so dramatically and so drastically, every single moment of every single day, because of all the different variables that we have at play, we're all children on many levels compared to others that we know less about than they do. We have to accept that with humility and sincerity so we don't get caught in the ego trap. Because that's how we get caught in the ego trap. We get caught in the ego trap by thinking that it's impossible that we can be adults, that we can be possibly parents or grandparents or otherwise responsible for what we're responsible and dominate what we dominate, and yet still be vulnerable like a child to something that we don't understand. So our ego doesn't let us accept the fact that we could be vulnerable. And that's a defense mechanism, and that's natural, it's normal, but it doesn't help us grow. So we're constantly in a paradox and a conflict, fight or flight, only when we're challenged. And of course life is about the challenges. Otherwise, once things calm down, we can quote unquote retire, and things become status quo and don't change, well, it's basically death. on a certain level. I'm not judging anyone, talking in general terms, philosophically, not criticizing anyone, because at the moment, based on all of the history that we've all inherited, and all the baggage and luggage that we all came into this world to, and then was put upon us, no one can really be held responsible for how we got here. In sum total, no one person. We can be held responsible for what we do going forward. And that is the key. The key is to recognize what we do have the ability to respond to, what we don't have the ability to respond to. We have to focus on what we can actually make a difference at. So what we're trying to show is it's not a question about adding more excesses and more extremes to test the stress limits of the extremes, but it's about finding balance by, after testing the extremes, we see what it is, not that we might want, that we actually need, including all of the allowances and variables for human personality that might make our needs slightly different than the others, because to another it might be called a want if it's not their need. And that's okay. There's a certain amount of wants that we accept, the emotional wants that become like needs, we accept, we respect. And then together, we can, and we should, aim to find balance. But the balance is within a framework, well within the extremes, not at the extremes. There's no balance at the extremes. I want to make this very clear. The balance at the extremes can only be temporary, for a few different reasons. One reason is because the stress that is on the system or the fulcrum or whatever it is that is holding up that balance, the stress is there even though it might not be apparent. Okay, so the stress is there, that's number one. So the deterioration, the constant wear and tear on the system is there even if we don't notice it. The moment before something breaks, it hasn't broken, but it's in the process of breaking, if it's a slow and gradual process. That's one thing. The second thing is that we don't live in a laboratory environment. We don't live isolated anymore. No one is isolated anymore, even if we think we are, we're not. No matter where one might be or think they are, today we realize how small this world is, how enormous the universe is, but still how small this world is, how small and insignificant relatively we are as far as the grand scheme of things. But on the micro scheme of things, meaning on our scheme of things, we're the center. And us being the center, the balance isn't about seeing how far we can stretch ourselves to other extremes to try to envelop or engulf other centers. It's about securing our center, strengthening our core. I'm not talking about muscularly, but that too. So when we do reach out at those times, it won't cause us the stress that breaks us. Today, the world and most people are at the brink of system failure, organic or otherwise, and that means so many different things, and it's meant to be not a play on words, but meant to have multiple meanings. So as one might say, pun intended, but it's not a pun. We're coming close to Passover. Passover, spiritually, traditionally, biblically, historically, is a reboot, is a reset. Of course, we, when I say we, I mean the people who follow the traditions, but I also mean the people in today's society that are cognizant and conscious of the fact that there are people in this world that follow this holiday called Passover, regardless of how, what, where, and why. The reason for me saying this, that it's a time of a reboot, whether real or perceived, is because we need reboots. We need an opportunity to say, okay, we're allowed to start over. We're allowed to say, you know what, it's time to put that to bed. We have seasons, regardless of where you are in the world. There's a concept of seasons, especially since we rely on others. There's the month, the lunar month. We see the moon to symbolize the renewal. The springtime, as you can see, things starting to grow, whether they're weeds to one or medicine to another or food to a third, or just coverage. And we come to this moment of renewal because we're taught that it's not ever meant to stay the same too long. Stay the same too long and you don't grow. You might think you're staying the same, but if you stay the same when everything else around you has changed, trust me, it's not the same. We don't live isolated. No matter how much we think we might be living isolated in a bubble, we don't. Everything we do affects others, and everything others do affects us, and a butterfly effect, and other effects. Didn't mean to scare that kitten. There's a mother walking by who's given me flack in the past for feeding the cats and for taking the park away from children, which is not the case, but I understand her concern. So Passover, including the 10 plagues and all the other stories, part of the Passover story, what I was starting to say before and I got distracted. I apologize, I don't plan these speeches, I don't plan these talks. Never can anticipate what's going to happen here in the park, and it throws me off. If I ever hear strange things in my voice or my voice changing, it's because this is real time here. Like I said, there's many cats. At the moment I'm not going to say 50, but on a rotating basis, easily 50 even per day, but definitely per week. Different cats. This energy is always shifting, always moving, as you can see. And what I was trying to say about the Passover story is, those who celebrate it, well, the Seder night is 1 or 2 nights, depending on where you live in the world, a year. Passover is 7 or 8 days per year, depending on where you live, meaning in Israel it's 1 week, and outside of Israel it's 8 days. And anybody wants to know why, we can talk about that, but that's not the point of why I'm bringing this up. What I'm trying to say is the story of Passover and the story of the Exodus from Egypt took place over years and generations and hundreds of years. The story is a long story. To summarize it in 1 night or 2 nights over wine, heavy crackers, and a lot of different people forced into a ceremony cannot do justice to what really happened. It wasn't a 1-night thing that came and went and you could forget about it. This was an entire era. This is an entire historical period that changed history, made history, and it affects things until today. So it's not to be belittled that we think when we celebrate holidays, whichever holiday it is, regardless of the religion, the faith, the system, the stories that we celebrate and the things we mark with days here and there represent sometimes entire histories of people. When we have an Independence Day of a country, it's not that on that one day something happened and there was a vote in some hypothetical place where they said, okay, let's decide today to establish this country. Regardless of the country, wars were fought, sadly. Lives were lost, sadly. Other people's lives were destroyed, even if they weren't lost. And history changed over long periods of time. Then we see on a calendar with our weapons of mass distraction, we have 365 and a quarter days in the solar year, 24 hours in every day, 60 minutes in every hour. Daytimers and planners, I know whoever have heard of a daytimer, I can guess how old you are, at least. But planners, schedules, calendars, reminders, all these things, we've reduced things down to the nanosecond, to the point where our lives are fragmented. Every day doesn't consist of 24 hours anymore. Every minute doesn't consist of 60 seconds. We have endless amount of non-stop overlapping signals, notifications, redundancies, reminders, warnings, sirens, messages. So much information all happening to distract us, to make us think that things happen in a blink of an eye, and that if we blink our eyes, it goes away. And that's not true, obviously. The problem is that we don't get a chance with this chaos of life to stop and think and realize, you know what, the lessons I learned when I was a child, I have to update them. It's not that my parents were wrong necessarily, it's not that my teachers were wrong necessarily, but when they taught me something when I was 5, it was because I was 5. Besides the fact the world was different back then, I was different back then. What I knew and understood when I was 5 was very different than what I know and understand now. Not a question of being more right or less right, it's just a question of what in the world could a person possibly do when they're 5 years old. They're barely responsible for themselves. They're usually not even responsible for themselves. If they're lucky, they're responsible for the fact that they go to the toilet properly, don't spill their foods, and they don't say bad words. Then they listen to all the warnings that all the adults tell them what to do and not to do. So the way we teach children is not the way we teach adults. Look at the way we teach children is not the way we teach adults. We have to upgrade and update and modify our understanding of things. It's not wrong when our parents tell us mythological things when we're children, because there's no other way for them to tell us things. The problem is they're supposed to, they or whoever else is supposed to educate us, is supposed to upgrade and update and footnote everything as we grow. But life is chaotic today and fragmented. We're stretched and spread around the universe now. It's not even around the world anymore. And there's people already exploring from here, people living in Mars or on Mars or with the destination of Mars and everything in between. On the moon, other planets, Venus, virtual worlds, Pandora. So how do we expect anyone to have the time to think that maybe what they know needs corrections when they're always trying to go where no one's been before? Always trying to be the next new discoverer of the next new thing, because that'll put them on the map or make them a mark in history. Our problem is that our education system is completely broken. There is no way to teach the things we need to know, because it's happening and changing so fast. We need to learn basic principles of how to learn how to adapt. We have to teach things today when things move at such a lightning speed, when information is so rapidly available and instantly available, and how much false information there is. We have to be taught very different things, not how to search information, but how to filter it. Not how to look things up and hear them, but how to apply them. And if it isn't correct, how to look until we find the right answers. So we're being taught still, in many places, practices of the way people did things thousands of years ago, when none of that should really apply today. I'm not criticizing religions, I'm not criticizing traditions, but I'm questioning the elements of things that are being held on to. Because most of the stories, especially the scary stories, the scare tactics we teach children, or we teach in religions, or we teach in anywhere, are meant for a very, very specific moment in time, or a period in time. It's meant to prepare us for just in case. We can't stay paranoid and delusional and in fear our whole lives. Not if the fear is gone. Obviously, if the fear is still there, we have to fear it. But when, we learn how to cross the street, then it's different than when we don't know how to cross the street. When we learn what hot and cold is and how to deal with hot and cold, then it's not the same as don't ever touch the stove, or don't go near a fire, or don't play with matches. So the problem is that we're still scarred and traumatized by those dark, deep secrets and scare tactics. They're so ingrained in our psyche, because they were never untaught, they were never modified, they were told, well, that's okay if, and that's okay if, and that's okay if. Some things we are, like for example, when people get driver's licenses and they go through the education that they're supposed to go through and they learn how to operate a vehicle, one would think they know a little bit better than a person who doesn't. Sadly, even those lessons and teachings have changed. It's more about how to get in and pass a test rather than how to actually operate whatever you're operating safely. I know I'm making generalized, sweeping statements, but I'm talking about most people. Sure, there are exceptions, but those exceptions, unfortunately, don't carry enough weight to sway things today. The exceptions barely register. They have to be the norm. I'm talking big, broad terms that most people won't understand, won't even know why I'm saying them. I'm going to simplify things. The Passover night, we talk about 4 children. 4 children that ask 4 questions. A wise, a simple, a wicked, and yes, there's a 4th. We learn how to deal with children, meaning to answer questions regardless of where a person comes from. Yes, we need to adapt and adopt different practices depending on who we are, where we are, what we're trying to accomplish, and customize everything. We have the tools to do that today. Thankfully, we have the tools to do that today. Thank you to all the people. Infinite love and gratitude to all those who have worked diligently and hard on the tools and on the technologies to help people modify and customize education and edutainment. Thank you to all those who have put in all the efforts to make this world relatively so much easier to live in than what it was even 100 years ago or beyond. But sadly, turning that into reasons to fight over who gets to benefit from those advances, who gets to harvest or loot the spoils of this war of survival, that's a shame, because in the end, there's one survivor, there's one person who has it all, or even a few who have it all. If they can't share it, they're not going to enjoy it. Not only that, but they're going to spend the rest of their lives trying to defend it, protect it, and probably enjoy it less than if they had nothing. So on that happy note, I'm going to wrap up for now. I can invite anybody to ask more questions or to join us if they want. And infinite love and gratitude. Have a wonderful rest of your day and week. Hope to see you on the other side.